Welcome, all hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters, to the only fish and wildlife conservation podcast that goes behind the scenes of the business of conservation, the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Our podcast is hosted by John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute and Jim Cucaruto of the Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. John and Jim will talk with experts from all sectors of the conservation arena about their passion for conserving the great outdoors. So please welcome our hosts of the Connecting with Conservation podcast, John and Jim.
Welcome to another episode of Connecting with Conservation, the only podcast that talks about the business of conservation, how conservation works in our country. I'm your co-host, John Gassett from Wildlife Management Institute, and I'm here with my fellow co-host, Jim Cucaruto from Outdoor Stewards of Conservation. Jim?
All right. Hello, fellas. Well, today we've got kind of something brand new for Connecting with Conservation. All the episodes that we've recorded to date are folks that we've known, like John and I or Scott. All the guests we've worked with over the years, but we want to get a little bit outside our comfort zone and find some, new perspective and new voices out there. And, I'm not a fan of social media, but it's a necessary evil, and I'm on it way more than I want to be. And I really, get caught up in folks that talk about conservation, and they have their own perspective on it, and they talk about what got them involved in it. And today we've got one of those, folks on that I just saw on social media, reached out there and said, hey, would you like to come on and talk to us about your perspective of conservation? And so Josh said, yeah, give it a try. And so Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I really appreciated you reaching out in the DMs on social media. So it is a necessary part of communicating nowadays in a modern world. But yeah, I mean, I came to social media via a hunting and fishing business that I own, and so I live in Wimberley, Texas, which is 45 minutes outside of Austin, Texas. For those who don't know where Wimberley is, most people know where Austin is, all the barbecue and the music. And I live on our family ranch, which is a 1,000-acre ranch. It's mostly developed all around it. And I run a hunting and fishing operation called Spoke Hollow Outfitters off of that ranch as a means for providing income to conserve the property.
Josh, you mentioned, we were talking earlier, you mentioned you're what we call an adult-onset hunter, an angler, right? So you didn't grow up doing that, although you said you had a grandfather that did it, but largely you grew up in a non-hunting household and then found it as an adult. So tell us a little bit about that. We're seeing that more and more now.
Yeah, so I am an adult-onset hunter. And by onset and adult, I mean an adult-obsessed onset hunter, because I started without hunting at all, and now I probably spend over 100 days in the field hunting. My parents were neither one of them hunted. I grew up in an anti-gun household, and I was anti-gun for a large portion of my life. But I was obsessed with food, always from being young. Always loved cooking. Always loved food, and that led me to being in the culinary world and owning restaurants. And restaurants, when friends of mine call me and say, I want to start a restaurant, I usually just say, don't. So, bless all those people who are out there doing the hard work in the restaurants, but that is a very tough business. And that led me into the wine industry, and I ultimately kind of semi-retired out of the wine industry. And I was looking for the next thing to do, spending time with my kids. I read a book called Omnivore's Dilemma. It's a Michael Pollan book. And that book talks about our food systems, and it talks about 3 different food systems. One of them being the industrial agri-farm complex, the next one being sustainable farming, and the third one being hunting and foraging. And the sustainable farming spot really resonated with me. One, the whole book resonated because I had built a career around feeding people, entertaining people, gathering around tables and cooking amazing food and I wanted to get this next level engagement with my food at the source of it. And so, hunting was just not even an option because I was still kind of anti-gun. So I was like, you know what, I want to start a sustainable farm. And so I put the book down after reading it, and I looked at my wife and I said, honey, I want to be a sustainable farmer. And she's great because she's like so supportive. She's like, okay, if that's what you want to do, let's do it. And so I spent a year reading everything I possibly could by Joel Salatin about sustainable farming. And I built several raised bed gardens out of limestone. I had never built anything out of limestone. So I learned how to build things out of limestone and did this masonry work and built these beautiful raised bed gardens, or at least I think they're beautiful. And a year later, I say, okay, honey, it's time to plant some vegetables. It's time to get this garden started. And this is our first step into sustainable farming. And it took me a whole of 1 week for my highly ADD personality. It was like we planted the vegetables, and I would go back and check on them like 30 minutes, every 30 minutes. Hey, corn, what are you doing? You doing anything? Corn, and the corn does not do anything in 30 minute increments. And so I got distracted and left because the plants were boring, and then they all died. And I realized I am not going to be a farmer. So, but at this point, I'm a year in to building gardens and committed to this idea of getting deep level engagement with my food. And I'm like, well, I guess I need to go to the next chapter in the book, and I need to hunt because that's how I'm going to get this engagement. Took a class at a local farm that raised heritage hogs, where I learned to butcher at that class. We shot the hog in the class, 22, close range. I did not want to shoot the hog in that class, so I was still not comfortable with that part. But in my mind, the reason I took this road was I figured it would be very easy to learn to put a hole in an animal, but it would be very complicated to learn how to take a dead animal and turn it into food. There's a lot of steps there. And so I took this approach of learning to butcher first. And I can remember clearly the moment in time. It was cold outside. The pig was, everything about it was gross to me for a while. Like, you got the guts, you're dealing with the intestines, all this stuff. But I remember the smell, the iron smell in my nose, and the moment in time where that pig became not something dirty, but something highly clean to me. And the process, the skin that I can recall the cold air on my skin. I can clearly see that moment. I feel that this was food. This was not a dead animal. The hide was off. The intestines were all out. Everything, all the guts were out. And I was working with food at its one of most clean, pure, connected ways. And there was no turning back from that moment in time, because me, somebody who had previously not supported gun ownership, somebody who had not supported hunting, to me, all of the sudden, all of the food, when you go into a grocery store and they remove the feathers and the wings and the faces, and they wrap it in a nice plastic package, and they put the picture of a pretty farm on the front of it, and they stack it bodies deep in a coffin freezer. Like, to me, that was the weird thing now. And it was like a light bulb. All of a sudden I was like, oh, this is way more natural. This feels better. So ever since that time, I founded a company to take people hunting and fishing. Predominantly, it began as a company to take people like myself, didn't have a path, didn't have an on-ramp, to provide them an on-ramp. It's now expanded significantly beyond that as my understanding of hunting and fishing has expanded. I now take people on much more elaborate journeys to pursue wild birds. I got obsessed with birds. It's funny that I say that I'm into the food, because I am, and I still do hunt deer. But hunting upland birds, I think, is a calorie negative pursuit.
Yeah, oh yeah. So you've hunted chucker before then.
Oh, yeah, I've hunted chucker.
Yeah, burned 10,000 calories to get 500.
Yeah, exactly. It is very calorie negative. But what wing shooting does provide, and an important thing is, it provides connection to nature and an understanding, and it gives me a grounded rootedness in what it is to be a human, what it is to be a human interacting with nature. And I think it's very important to have that through some vehicle because I carry that groundedness with me everywhere I go. So when I see something in a city that's void of trees, that seems unnatural to me now. I'm looking for the trees. I'm looking for the birds in those trees. I'm looking because I have that interaction with nature, even though it's calorie negative with upland hunting. It's not about the food. It's about being connected.
Yeah, the experiences there, just getting outside, and it's hard. That's one of the things that outdoor industry and connecting with conservation tries to do is just spread the word. We talk to ourselves a lot, but we don't talk to Josh before he started hunting on his own, right? We should be the ones that say, "Hey, come on, enjoy the outdoors, and let's help you get started." So you had a lot of barriers to get started, starting from anti-gun to now enjoying it. But now you're the perfect guy to spread the word, and because you didn't grow up doing it, the path is different for folks. And what caught my eye about your social media was the food aspect. I'm not a very good cook, but and I learned from my mistakes. I think there was one video you put out there when somebody says, "Oh, I like," you were cooking venison steak, and somebody says, "I'll take one," or somebody says, "Well done," and you're like, "Oh, thank you," and here's your medium rare steak or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I said, like, what did I say? I said, if you're cooking a steak and somebody says, "Well done," tell them thanks and hand them a meat.
I'm going to use that. I'm going to blatantly plagiarize that and use it because I feel the same way. It's like if it's over medium rare, it's too done. So it's interesting that you mentioned, that sort of a book changed your perception, and it got you into hunting because, and I grew up, I was not an adult onset hunter. I started hunting when I was following my dad when I was 6, 7 years old with a squirrel rifle. But it was in grad school working in a wildlife field where I read the Paleolithic prescription. And we always ate what we shot and caught, but that book really changed how I thought about wild game because it really, defines how, as a species we evolved and the types of things, the unprocessed, unrefined foods that our bodies are designed to eat. And it resonated with me that, rather than buying something in a piece of styrofoam wrapped in plastic that I'm not sure what it had injected into it, what it was fed, or how it was processed, that I can do it better myself and it's better for you. And to me, it tastes better.
Yeah, that's a fact, isn't it? I mean, you start to question all the food systems when you hunt, and I'm I'm not under the false illusion that everybody can hunt for all their food. I mean, me personally, if I'm not traveling, it's easy for me to eat a lot of game. When I start traveling, it becomes hard. I mean, a lot more convenience food. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'd say, 75% of my diet is wild game. Um, and if I'm at home and not traveling, that number runs up to 100%. But unfortunately, I travel a lot. But to your point, not everybody can hunt for all their food, and that's not the purpose of hunting. Because once you hunt, question food source, which means we all know we need to have industrial farm complex to feed everyone. But when you start to have an understanding of what animals need and what healthy food needs, we start to demand that the farm complex provides us healthier food. And so I think it's important for people to understand hunting and understand natural food sources so that we can require that the food industry provide people with the closest thing to that.
Right. And it looks like, I mean, you're all in, right? You said you went from nothing to everything, which is a great story, but you're giving time back. I see you're working with Texas Park and Wildlife Foundation, and I think you said you're working on with Trout Unlimited, and the fishing side of things is big too. But tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing, to help support those organizations.
Yeah, so it's been a few years, but I used to engage regularly with Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. and I help to set the baseline for some of the programs that they do in their mentored hunting space. And that was a big passion project for me, to help kickstart that and help define it. And it continues on today. Uh, I've focused a lot of my conservation energies and efforts to Trout Unlimited. I serve on the National Board of Trustees for that organization. Um, I find that it's an organization that deeply resonates with my own personal conservation drive. Um, the mission being focused on salmonoid species, though it's not hunting, it impacts hunting because what's required for salmonoids is clean water. And coincidentally, everything else needs clean water too. So, so I find myself being able to impact conservation at a deep level with that organization. It's a wonderful organization, about 400 and change employees, a little over $200 million a year in top line dollars that we are dealing with. Majority of our dollars go straight to projects in the field, in public land spaces, and a large portion of our dollars go to Main Street businesses, contractors who are helping us to facilitate and implement those conservation projects. Um, our funding comes from a lot of different sources, but everyone in all conservation funding is ultimately impacted, as you guys know well, and you preach so much, through hunting and fishing and through the taxes that are derived from it.
Yeah, and we talk about ad nauseum, the Pittman Robertson and the hunting license sales, but when you mentioned the volunteerism, the millions of hours that people that fish, and they'll just the trout street cleanups and removing dams and stuff like that. That's I mean, we should try to figure out how to calculate, the volunteer hours and put that into a number because it's got to be billions of dollars worth of conservation support.
Yeah, it is. And it's the intangibles beyond just the volunteer support, but the advocacy and the dinner table advocacy and the workplace advocacy. The time that goes into somebody just at the water cooler at work talking about conservation. I mean, those are the even more unquantifiable things, and the time spent on educating youth, and the dividends that pays forward. I mean, it's such a huge piece because what I typically tell people, we when we were doing the mentor programs, and we will actually start doing some mentor programs with more national organizations now. Just my focus has been that I decided I really want to reach outside of Texas, and I really want to try to help organizations that have multi-state reach. And one of the key things that we would do in a mentor program is somebody would come in, and we would ask them what their desired outcome was. What do you perceive as success in this program? And we would ask them where they came from, and they would give us the background, and they would give us what they perceived as desired success, and then they would tell us. Then we would go around the circle, and when it got to the facilitator, the group leader, they would basically say their story, how they came to the space, and then they would say, one of the desired outcomes for me, or at least this was my approach personally. My approach personally, and when we ran anything at my ranch, was I would say, the desired outcome for me is for you to become a sporting conservationist. And this is what I tell every new hunter angler that I take out. And I tell them, I know you don't know what a sporting conservationist is, but let me explain it to you. All hunters and anglers support conservation, but not all hunters and anglers are conservationists. And, that is to acknowledge that the excise tax, as you mentioned, the Pittman-Robertson Act, our dollars will support conservation. But in order to be a conservationist, I tell them you must adopt the philosophy of conservation. And my understanding is that at its core level, a conservationist acknowledges that we must conserve and use respectfully the resources that we currently have for the current living beings, be it human and non-human beings on the planet, in the future. humans and flora and fauna of the. That is the conservationist creed, but that doesn't make you a conservationist. That just means you've adopted the philosophy. I tell them. And so I say, in order to become a conservationist, you have to take a step further, and you have to apply that belief, whether it be through volunteer hours or whether it be through advocacy, through talking and recruiting and preaching conservation, or it be, and the one thing, and I tell people, if you never hunt or fish again, what I hope you take away today is the understanding of how important these wild places are, and you vote for conservation, because we can all do that. And so I say, if you adopt the philosophy and do one of those things, support conservation organizations with dollars, volunteer hours, advocacy, or vote, any one of those things, you are a sporting conservationist. And they usually look at me and they're like, I thought I just came here to learn how to hunt a deer.
That might be why they came there. They're going to get more than they bargained for.
They are. And by the time we leave, anything that I'm doing when I'm mentoring, I'm typically taking people out and I'm saying, hey, look at that grass over there. And I'm going to teach them about about the fauna, about the flora and how it relates to the fauna, because I tell them that I believe the fastest way to become a sporting conservationist, to become a conservationist, is to learn to use the naturalist lens. And the naturalist lens is a perspective that I believe is best developed by taking a concerted effort of observing a species and its relationship to its environment, how it impacts the environment, and how the environment impacts it. The natural jump from making this observation, whether you're a bird watcher, an angler, or a hunter, the natural conclusion is going to be to ask, how is that environment impacting me? How am I impacting the species? And you get that interconnectedness. And once you have that interconnectedness, then you really understand the reliance we have on a grasshopper. Like, a grasshopper feeds this, which impacts that, which impacts this, and ultimately that means clean drinking water for me.
I love the story of hearing, how you got involved in it from reading, and I would never have gotten started hunting or fishing from reading. So I mean, but when you talk about who you read about, and a lot of people point to Aldo Leopold or Teddy Roosevelt, but you found somebody else that's kind of that you want to give credit to on conservation too, that most people don't point to.
Yeah, George Bird Grinnell is probably, I think, one of the most foundational. And talking with you guys believe conservationists of all time. I mean, he was influencing Roosevelt. He was influencing Pichot. I mean, he was this guy who was running a publication that was truly impacting all of the thought leaders at the time. What a phenomenal human being. And we all owe a debt of gratitude to Grinnell. We all do. Whether you're a hunter, angler, hiker, biker, or just somebody who drinks water. Which is
exactly. Well, and I like your thought process on the difference between the benign participation, for lack of a better term, of buying a license, buying some gear, whatever, as being a conservationist, versus the actions. What do you do after that? And I can't tell you how many farmers I've helped, bring hay out of a field because they're letting me hunt their property, or help them plant trees along a stream corridor because they want to protect the stream just like I do. And that's the price you pay for being a conservationist. You go out and do those things, and you go out and tell other people about how to do them. And we're on a more basic level. WMI is just completing a big nationwide poaching study, and funded by Boone and Crockett. And it's what started the whole initiative was a lot of the public still equates hunting and poaching. So talking about the antithesis of a conservationist, here's someone who steals from the public, who takes animals illegally, takes them, the wrong time, the wrong place, the wrong gear, whatever. And the public still sees that as just like one of us that are conservationists and hunters. And we got to change that attitude. Folks got to realize that we're the white hat people. We're the ones not only paying for it, but actually performing the actions on the ground in many cases.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective. I think that as somebody who was on the outside working my way in, I think that for a long period of time, my perspective, and I think a lot of the public's perspective, is of the classic trophy shot, typically going to be a large game hunter standing over or next to an animal that they shot, which I now understand is a point of pride. When you're able to take a large racked deer, what that means a lot of times is that you have selectively harvested. You have decided to let a lot of other things go because you're particularly going after this one thing. And this one thing is something that may be even sliding past prime herd viability. It's something that was going to soon become a resource draw on the herd. And that selective harvesting is come to by gaining an extreme knowledge of the environment that you're in. It is an observationist's. You get there through observing and learning, and it is a place of pride. But a lot of times, the public, non-hunting public, will see that and think that the point of hunting is to kill the animal. And what I would encourage anybody who's listening to this podcast and all people in the hunting spaces, we all know that we don't go hunting for that moment that we kill the animal. We go hunting to be in the woods. We go on hunting to be with our friends. We go hunting to share stories, to share meals, to share campfires. And the hunt extends after we do all the hard work, because all the hard work is after you get that animal. We all know that when it's the sun's going down and it's getting cold and you're, trying to process a deer, the conversation extends to the dinner table, to the food that we prepare for our friends. And that's why we hunt. That one little moment is significant and deserves high levels of respect, but it is in the grand scheme of why we do it, not why we do it. And so I think people just have to get better at telling those stories, taking the small pictures of the moments in camp and sharing those things and sharing them with the non-hunting community to show them, why we really do the things we do.
Well, one of my favorite quotes, we get back to the book thing, is from Jose Torre Gasset, which, despite my best efforts, is no relation, even though our names are almost identical. Uh, but he said that he doesn't hunt in order to kill, but he kills in order to have hunted. In other words, there has to be, if you're consider yourself a hunter, there has to be an opportunity to take game, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is the hunt. Just the opportunity to take that game is you have to have that. Otherwise, you're a wildlife watcher.
Yeah.
Or you're
And we were talking earlier about the idea of why is this important? And sure, the Pittman Robertson Act and the excise tax, that tells part of the story. But the way that I found Grinnell, we were talking about earlier, Jim, was I found Grinnell because I started asking questions about philosophically, questions like Gasset was pointing out. Philosophically, why is hunting and fishing conservation? The excise tax is something that guys like Grinnell, Roosevelt, we all supported that. That came out of us choosing to have an excise tax. But why is hunting conservation? And the thing that I came to understand is that hunting and fishing is not the only way to become conservationist, but it's a fast way, because in order to do the thing, we must have healthy ecosystems. We were talking about this earlier. If I'm a camper or a hiker or a hiker or a mountain biker, and I'm going to Teton National Forest, or I'm going somewhere, some beautiful place in Wyoming, whatever it is, and somebody looks at me and says, "There's no elk herd population." Well, it doesn't matter. I can still go camping. I can still go mountain biking. I can still go hiking. I can do all those things. Now, if you say that to an angler or a hunter who has spent time observing the connectivity of a web of life, and that connectivity of web of life directly impacts the thing that they love to do, and you say, and they don't even have to be going there to hunt elk. They could be going there on a camping trip, and you say, "There's no elk in that area," and they would say, "Well, why?" And then you're gonna tell them, "Well, it's because of this, the lack of this fauna." Well, what happened to that? And you're going to say, well, this is what happened to that. And then most times, the good ones, and there's more good ones than not, are going to say, how can I help fix it? How can we fix it? And that's why hunters and anglers are conservationists, not because of our excise dollars. Our excise dollars are a reflection of our desire and need to have a healthy ecosystem to do the things.
Yeah, it saddens me even just to think of no elk. I mean, and that's part of, I think, just, but, kind of close it out, like your advice to millions of people that are sitting on a fence that want to step into the field and start hunting or into a stream and start fishing. What's your advice for someone that's close, but they haven't pulled the trigger yet, let's say?
Just do it. Find an on-ramp. There's a lot of good state programs that operate under R3. Find a friend. Be open to it. Whatever is holding you back is a construct of your own mind. Whether it be that you don't see people like yourself or whatever it is that's holding you back, trust me, the hunting and fishing community wants you in it and will welcome you with open arms and take the step.
That's great advice. So, where can we find more information on Josh? I know you have the social media, and tell us a little bit about where folks can follow up with more info from what you're doing.
Yeah, so you can visit my business, Spoke Hollow Outfitters, at spokehollow.com. You could follow along with the fun stuff that I'm always up to on Instagram at Texas_Josh. It's at Texas_Josh. And from there, you can find all our other Instagram, Spoke Hollow, and all those things. I always love a good DM, so reach out.
Never know, you might be on a podcast. Well, definitely appreciate you coming on.
John, yeah, thank you again so much. This has been great having you on. Great perspective, things that folks need to hear. Keep doing the good work. Love the frog skin camo, by the way. I'm an old school camo guy. When I see that stuff, it's like, man, I love that stuff. And now Mossy Oak's bringing their old school stuff back again. So I'm like, this is my peak time now. So, but we appreciate you being on. Good luck with everything. If you need anything from us, we're a phone call away. And Jim, it's always good to see you. To our listeners, please continue to listen, download our podcast, subscribe to us if you can. That way you get the updates on when our new ones drop. And with that, we'll see you in the woods or on the water.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Please do us a favor and tell your buddies, friends, family, and others about what you've learned here today. If you like what you heard, come on back anytime and listen to another episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast.